Hello. I hope Past Summit 2020 is going really well for you guys. I'm having a blast and I'm really excited about our topic today. We're going to be talking about DevOps and the real world challenges. But first, I got a little bit of housekeeping to do. Do not miss out on everything that Pass has to offer, especially the Pass Pro membership. Some cool stuff going on there. The Azure Boot Camp that Microsoft is putting on only for Pass Pro members. Sign up for Pass Pro, get in there and get your learn on because you can. Plus, Pass Marathon virtual groups, SQL Saturdays, local groups, and all of the other stuff that we do at Pass. It is great things. Make sure you fill out your session evals. We need those. And I think that's it for slides. Yay! All right, hang on. Let me switch back to my camera. And now I can join the conversation with all my friends. With me today is Kathy Kellenberger, Angela Tidwell, Mindy Kernett, and this other guy, Stuart Ainsworth.
Hey.
And what we're doing today, this is a Redgate vendor session. I just want to say that up front. This is a Redgate vendor session, but we're not going to be talking necessarily about Redgate tools. What we are going to be talking about today are the challenges that databases present when trying to implement DevOps. And I'm going to first let everyone introduce themselves. And then we'll start asking questions because I'm mainly going to shut up after this. I'll ask a few questions. I'll keep an eye on your questions either in the chat window or in the Q&A window. But really, I want to hear from everyone else. So let's start with Kathy. Go ahead and tell us who you are.
Hi, Kathy Kellenberger, and I'm the editor of Simple Talk and a DevOps advocate for Redgate. And I don't know what else you need to know. I'm co-leader of the Women in Tech virtual group, which is really fun, and just love working at Redgate and love working with SQL Server.
Cool. Stuart.
I am Stuart Ainsworth. I'm with Jack Henry and Associates. I work for the Gladiator Managed Security Services Division. I am manage the service reliability engineering team for Gladiator, and I've got a background as a database administrator. I've been involved with PASS for a long time, and I'm excited to be back for this. So,
Mindy.
Hi, I'm Mindy Kernett. I own my own database consulting company. I work primarily with the transportation industry. I am on the board of directors for the Passport, and I've been working with SQL Server for over 20 years. I stopped counting now because it's disturbing. It's approaching 25, and I was like, that's enough. We don't need to go. It's good. That's good.
Yeah, I'm sad. It's over 25 now for me. Anyway, Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela Tidwell, and I'm a solutions architect at Jack Henry and Associates with the SRE team. I actually work with Stu, and I am a co-leader of the Austin chapter of the SQL Server local user group.
And a Minotaur expert.
And a Minotaur expert.
Sorry, in joke. Sorry. One thing before we get going, I do want to point out today is SQL Kilt Day, so make sure you're rocking your kilts. Just wanted to point that out. And now let's get going and start talking about our topic. First up, databases. Why would we do DevOps on databases? Let's start with that one. Does anybody want to volunteer, or do I pick people?
Oh, I'll volunteer.
Go ahead.
Trust but verify.
Yeah.
It's a big one. Like, okay, so yeah, you built this thing, and I'm very proud of you. You did a great job. No, I'm not just going to go ahead and push it to production. No, we need to test it, and so that's where my team comes in. So the developers build it, and before it goes to ops, that's where I come in. I say whether it can go or not because I use Redgate SCA to make sure that what you sent me, which is wonderful and I'm very proud of you, won't break everything that's already in there.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Anyone else want to add to that one?
I will. I think some organizations may have really mature DevOps processes for the application part, which is really easy. I mean, it's not easy, but it's easy to replace files, and that doesn't break things necessarily. But the database itself, that becomes a lot more difficult. But if you don't get those new tables out there, if you don't get the new columns or whatever is needed for the new features, then that becomes a bottleneck. So it really has to become part of that same process, so things go together and things, there's new database features end up at the same time as the new application features, or before, whatever. So I think that's one of the challenges, but also one of the reasons that it is really important.
Okay, yeah, perfect sense. Mindy, Stuart, anything to add to that?
I think predictability.
Ooh,
It's
good one.
very much that you, like Kathy said, it's extremely common for people to have versions of their app. This version, and they would make a new release, but to have the database components of that are in lockstep with the version of the database, and to be able to verify and predict, like Angela said, to verify, right? And to predict what's going to happen. And it's not just your columns, it's not just your tables, it's triggers, it's views, it's stored procedures, and other things that people don't necessarily even always think about that aren't at the database level. Those are complicated things. Like, what about certificates and assemblies and things like that have to go. If you get into a more complicated environment, it really requires some governance of the database to assure that you're not going to have unexpected results when you roll out a new build that has components in the database that the application depends on those components being a certain way and them being there.
And just to kind of build on that and kind of cap a lot of these thoughts together, is that I think that historically database development processes are very different than application development processes, right? And one of the goals of DevOps in general, right, is to accelerate the delivery of value throughout. And so you want to get things faster out of development. You want to get them in the hands of your end users and your customers as quickly as you can, with as minimal waste and as minimal challenges. And so if you look at the two sides of the spectrum from development to operations, if you don't bring database development in line with the rest of the development processes and the deployment processes, then you end up having multiple ways of solving similar problems, and that's unnecessary, right? I mean, I think the benefit of thinking about databases like you think about your application stack, and saying, I'm going to approach this problem in a similar fashion. I'm going to figure out a way to deploy this through the same sort of pipelines on demand when we need it with the applications, like you said, in lockstep. That reduces waste overall. I mean, it just makes it easier for your operations teams to actually deploy something, because we're doing the same thing over and over again. It's not, we got to go run all these 10 scripts to get this database up to speed, and then we have to deploy this application, and it's a different process. It's literally the same thing. And so it just makes it easier overall to do the software releases if you're trying to solve your problems in a very similar fashion. So
okay, well, I mean, that great stuff from everyone. I can't argue with any of you.
You'll lose.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. I know. The next question I have is, okay, so fine, that's why we're going to do this, and it makes sense. What's hard? What is it about databases that makes it hard? Why can't we just do things the way code does it? What's the challenge here? Mindy, you want to start?
Well, at least, and so there are different. Well, I come from a background where I am working with and for whatever it's worth, right? It's a historical client-server database architecture. The customers have control of the database. They have control of the server. It's sitting in their environment, most of the time on-prem, sometimes in the cloud, but it's in their environment. I can't get to it. God knows what they've done to it since we delivered them the build, because they can go in and add indexes. They can go in and add extra columns. They can go in and do things. And sometimes they're doing it just out of self-defense. They're trying to make it scale, or they need some reports, or they need something, right? And so, so, can you say the question one more time? Because I got this started thinking, and then I'm like, wait, what was the question?
Why are databases hard?
Oh, okay. So they're hard because it's not like when you deliver an application, you're compiling it and you're sending them some EXEs and some DLLs, or you have that source, you have that on a web page. They can't get to the source. They can't mess with your source. But in the case of, you know, especially if it's on-prem, or if it's in their database environment and you're not hosting it, you're not hosting that database. They have it on their SQL server. Then, I mean, unless you've encrypted every single object, and even then they can still get to the tables, it's hard, because you need to know, and here's the question that has come up, you know, if things go awry and things start, you know, you give them a new build and stuff starts squirting out the edges and stuff's not working correctly, you want to be able to say, I need the DDL for the version of the database that goes with the version of the app that they are on, so that I can do a SQL compare, so that I can figure out what is wrong. And if I can't even make that DDL because I don't even know what that version of the database is, then I'm in big trouble. So yeah, databases are completely different. I mean, unless you have full control and you're on a hosted environment where you're never letting anybody get to the database, it's hard.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, we've got a stack of questions from people in the audience, so I'm going to go to those, unless someone wants to add something to what Mindy just said on why databases are hard.
I always have opinions.
Yeah. That's why you're here, Stuart. We knew it.
See, I think that for me, it's we talked about the last time we had this conversation, that it's the fact that, you have to deal with state in data, right? So you got to have backups and preserve. You're supposed to protect the data, and a database represents both the state and the container in which that state is maintained. And so there's certain aspects of it, like Mindy pointed out, that are very mutable. You can change them, you can manipulate them as you will, but you've got to maintain that data. And so whatever changes you make, you're dealing with both of those aspects. You got to keep the integrity of the data that you're protecting, and yet you've also got to change the structure of the container in which it's in. So that's a problem. To top that all off, I think there's a cultural divide between people that have done database development and traditional developers that is tough at times to overcome. Angela, we work with the development team, and it's been hard, because the people that are now responsible for developing databases are people that have not historically had that database development experience. They're coming up to speed, they're learning it. And then on top of that, they're trying to learn how do you shift your mindset from dealing with text-based tools into making it more like an application. And that's a challenge, right? So it is a struggle. I don't think it's obviously we're all on this call. We don't believe it's an insurmountable struggle, but we just recognize that it is problematic, and you've got to attack it on multiple fronts. You got the technical aspects, you got the cultural aspects, you've got the training aspect, and all of those three things have got to you've got to tackle them with different solutions, but they all have to coordinate it in order to get past this hump, and you just have to do it little by little, a step at a time. So I'll stop there.
Cool. No. That's great. Thank you. So first one, Ian Grove says, asking for a friend. He has all the parts to the puzzle, a few SQL servers, a Git repo, Redgate SQL source control. And the question is, what does my friend need to do tomorrow to quickly do the minimum and build a good foundation for the future. Very slowly changing databases, DB integration, no dev teams, and a single DBA. Interesting setup. Volunteers, or do I pick people?
Yeah, I would say the first step is just, getting things in source control, because your typical place, which is kind of where I'm coming from, I'm not coming from a DevOps environment. The DBA says, oh, we need to add this index. We're going to do that, tonight off business hours, or we're going to add this or that or whatever. And just getting that under control, getting in source control, and starting to develop a process. And I think at organizations that don't have DevOps in place, it's just kind of a free-for-all. Not that the DBAs are doing a bad job, but as far as any kind of a set process, I think that's often lacking. So just getting started with that, with source control.
Oh, sorry, I was muting myself. Angela, what do you think?
I'm just going to have to just say exactly what Kathy said. Source control is absolutely the most important thing you can do at any and every moment.
Right. Stuart, Mindy, anything to add to that one?
I think beyond source control is if you're already working with source control, then you really need to start. To me, the next step is to start thinking about how do you build, right? And how do you begin to build NuGet packages? How do you begin to build deployments and releases off of source control? Because that's a skill set in and of itself. So if you're already got the idea that you've got your schema under control, you need and well, I guess the step before it. See, I always think of this. I think this is the step, and then I think, oh no, you got to have this other step first. You need to separate your development activities from your administrative activities. Like we try to reserve, like Kathy was saying, there are times when you have to go in and make an emergency change for something in production, and you may have to add an index because you're down or headed down, and you need to get things back up to normal fast. But that's really, to us, a development activity. So then we have to kind of go back through the development pipeline to make sure that it gets added to source control, et cetera. So that mindset of saying, of defining that dividing line between what is a development activity and what is an administrative operational activity, that's first. And then do all your development and make sure it all gets into source control, and then start working on the build process to figure out, okay, now I've got it in source control. How do I get it into my operational model in a safe way? And so I think that's the next step I would push for.
Okay. Mindy, do you want to add anything to this one, or do you want to just take first dibs at the next question? You get a choice.
I'll take the next one. I think that it's a complicated. There were a lot of questions in that question that he asked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you guys said. The one I would say CI is your next best. All right. So Mindy, the next question, Greg Cook says, okay, this one's gigantic, so don't feel like you have to answer it all. How would you set up the process around database DevOps, such as recommendations for branching strategies and rollback or fail forward approaches, or roll forward approaches? Man, that's a gigantic question, Greg. And Mindy, feel free to answer as much or as little as you want.
Yeah, well, there's no easy answer to this. This is a hard thing, and this has always been, because when you rolling back and rolling back, let's just talk about that. Holy mother, whatever, right? That can be a real, like, Lord help us all. I mean, they're really, and because you have the problem of it, you're thinking about rolling back. I mean, so there's rolling forward and rolling back in test. But if a database is in flux and data is coming into the system, and you have applied an upgrade in production, and you have streaming data or something coming in, there may be no rolling back. I mean, I don't know how you roll back without losing data that are elements that, that is very, very difficult. So it's not, this is where databases are very different than the apps, right? And so if you did something where you changed some columns and now there's some new data coming in that's of a longer data type than used to be allowed in the old schema, and you think you're going to roll back, then that's not an easy question. So there's all sorts of strategies that, you try to be super, super sure. I've always said with people who are looking at doing an upgrade that we want to do the upgrade in test. We want to try to attach the test. That's where we really have to have not only your unit testing and depending upon your QA department, but you have to have all of that functional testing that is real world and we've really struggled where I used to work at getting the customers to actually go through the action of doing the testing in-house with us and signing off on things, because a lot of times rolling back was restoring a backup. I mean, it's ugly. It can be. And I guess if you have a real simple changes and you're just adding some columns or there may be some rolling back. This is like where it actually benefits you if you're doing more often, more releases more often and smaller amounts of changes, then you have the possibility of rolling back more likely than if you're doing a once a year build that you're giving someone that has all the code that you've changed in a whole entire year. The odds of rolling back in that case are going to be probably pretty slim.
Yeah. No arguments from me. No, that's a great job on that one. Kathy, would you like to add some more?
Well, so I'm not coming from a DevOps background, and I'm just at this point learning the tools. So branching is one of the things I'll probably really look at in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I agree with Mindy. It's not like you can just replace a database. Let's just replace it with what it looked like, an hour ago if there's been new data coming in. So yeah, I agree. It would be really, really difficult to roll back. I think in some cases you could, I would assume it's a lot of work, maybe have rollback scripts if you have small changes coming in and something goes wrong. But I think in general, it's just would be really difficult to do. If you don't have the option of restoring a database, then you're kind of stuck unless you've got these tiny little changes coming in. Maybe, okay, we added a column. Do we go and delete that column? What do we do? So I probably don't have any great knowledge to add here on this one. Pretty tough question.
Angela, you want to put anything else on top? I mean, this is such a broad question, I know, but we seem to have focused on roll back, roll forward, and that's fine too, because there was another question for that. So anything you want to add?
It was a huge question. Can you ask it again? I mean, can you rephrase the question, or not rephrase? Can you restate the question?
Sure. In the form of an answer, or no, I'm kidding.
Yes, please.
How would you set up the process around database DevOps, such as recommendations for branching strategy and roll back or roll forward?
Yeah.
It's enormous. I mean, that question is everything.
it is everything. There's a lot there. What Mindy was talking about and what Kathy was talking about, if you make these gigantic changes and you only do it once a year, and then the possibility of having to roll back will make me stay up at night and cry. Like it's happened, right?
Don't do that.
I mean, it's terrifying, but because you're the person in the middle between developments, like just push it out, and operations is like, we got to have this to work, and you're in the middle going, it's going to break everything, right? What has eased my mind a lot is we use Octopus Deploy, and there's no rolling back. There's only rolling forward. And for some reason that it eases me a lot, because the thought of rolling back is so overwhelming and terrifying, and I need to go take a nap now because we talked about it. but so Octopus
Stewart
Deploy,
approves it. You can go take a nap.
My boss said I can go take a nap. Bye, y'all. well, Stu, do you want to add anything to that? That's, big.
I think that some of the things that we've done, and we'll talk a little, circle back to the whole idea of smaller releases, right? I mean, we have really, really pushed our development department to get us smaller releases more often because of a lot of the things you're saying. It makes the surface area so small, right? That you're making this one change, and if it breaks, one of the struggles I think for database administrators is we're so used to thinking of the database as the source of truth, and we have to protect the source of truth at all costs. And in reality, the whole model of DevOps is much more risk tolerant. You have to recognize that if you can make a small change quickly, you can risk it, and you may lose an hour's worth of data before it takes time to get another change rolled forward into it. But that's okay. I mean, you have to be okay with that. That it's not the 5-9 mentality that we had 15, 20 years ago, right? I mean, this is more like, okay, so much data is coming in so fast that we want to make sure that we get the right stuff in the right place. Now, obviously, there are environments where you have to be much more stable than that. If you're talking about medical or bank transactions, right? But the other piece of it is what we've done when it comes to like our branching strategy. We've been working with their development department, and they've kind of adopted that their main branch represents truth. This is the version that is supposed to be in production. So that's what we deploy from. Now, if we're going to do some advanced and early beta testing, we also have another branch that we call a feature. And so, they'll do all their testing, and it's basically stuff that we can put out into a prod-like environment or into prod in a separate schema or something like that. But it's stuff that's not quite ready for prime time yet. It hasn't had all of the changes, hadn't had all the testing. But when the ultimate time comes, we want to make sure that whatever version is most recent in our main branch is now the version that we have in production at the end of the day. So that's kind of the strategy that we've worked with development to implement. And it seems to be okay. And like Angela says, we use Octopus. So it is that whole roll forward mentality. And that's been one of those old guard mentalities that's been tough to get around, because we have QA analysts that always go, well, where's your rollback? And we're like, well, we don't roll back. The version numbers always go up, right? So if you're going to say .1 is the production release and .2 is a new feature, .3 may look just like .1 because you rolled it back. But we do that. We never go back in versions. We always say this is the standard that we're on as of today, right? And then we just kind of keep moving forward from there.
Because the difference between .2 and .3, even though 1 and 3 may match each other, the difference between .2 and .3 may preserve some data or do something with some data that was coming in .2 that you don't want to lose.
Right.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. All right, we're going to have to, no more everyone gets to answer every question, because this is, I haven't seen this yet this week. We've got like 30 questions or more. So
fire round.
Yeah, we're doing great. So we're going to kind of tighten it up just a little bit, do lightning rounds, I think. Most of the answers, Ed Pearson says, most answers focus on app devs, but I feel like they are ahead of DB devs in terms of DevOps. How do you get the DB folks who just go in and make changes to understand they need DevOps, they need source control, they need change management? Who wants to take that one? I didn't have a plan.
I'll take it. Cool. It's a cultural thing, and it is a management thing. You have to get your database developers in on the same teams as your application developers. And they have to be watching the tool sets, and they have to learn. It is so tempting, like I said before, to treat the database that is in production as truth. And it cannot be the truth because of all these things we talked about before: the version incompatibility issues, the integrity of the data, the mutability of the schema. Your development team is your development team, and it may be an application developer and a database developer and a Windows admin PowerShell developer, they're the people up front that are doing all of the work. But again, their goal is to get a good, clean build into source control. And then that build represents what should be in production, right? But it starts forward. You have to move it all. Shift left is the whole concept, right? So
okay, all right. So I'm just going to start picking on people. So Shane O'Neill asks, what is the minimum amount of environments that you would recommend? Prod, pre-prod testing, dev, QA, integration. Mindy, what do you think?
I would say, and this is assuming that you have like a SaaS or something, you're in control of the database, you're in control of the production database, you're not delivering it to somebody. I would say that you should have a dev. If you have any branching, you're going to need to have something that's for those branches, right? Because they're going to be slightly different. And then I would say QA, absolutely. And then I don't know that pre-prod, I don't know that that's necessarily a requirement. So I would say the dev, any branching, QA, and prod.
Okay.
Those are required, minimum requirement.
Anybody have a radical disagreement?
One thing I'm going to throw a wrench in here. When you say dev database, are we talking one dev database, or does each developer get their own? You know, are we sharing a database? Or so that can mean a lot more databases.
Well, they need to be able to check something out, right? And to market, and other people know that they're working on, that something's being currently worked on. And I know that they can do that by each having sort of their own copy of a local database. That, but there has to be like a period. There has to be a way to acquiesce all of that with each other on a regular basis, so that people don't step too much on each other's toes, and it needs to happen on a regular basis. And I guess that interval is something that really is going to depend upon the velocity of change. You know, because you don't want, there needs to be communication. Hopefully the projects, the sprints that people are working on are smaller, that you have management that's directing them so that you don't have any surprises, and that people know what they're supposed to be going and working on. I mean, so to go back to the previous question, you know, there needs to be a culture and there needs to be management involved. But so I've mostly seen it where people have their own local copies, but that's sort of, you know, they're working together by checking things out.
Yeah, my experience, that's generally the best way to do it. But lots of people do the shared model, which, oh my God, so painful. Anyway, moving on. Steve Coombs says, I'm assuming he's describing his own situation, which is, oh my gosh, you come into a company that has source control for a very complex database. All the objects are in the present and everything, but it's all treated like a file repository and not a project to deploy from. What would be your first step to try to build a pipeline? Angela, I'm going to pick on you. Sorry.
Ooh. Okay, say it again.
They've got source control, but all they're using it for, I guess, is tracking the changes. They're not deploying from it in any way.
Get a big cup of coffee. You know, all I can think is don't do that. That's just all. That's just this like a big red sign in my head going, don't do that. Oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm at a loss.
Somebody want to dive in on this one? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pick on you, Angela.
No, it's fine. I don't have the answer.
Anybody want to dive on this one?
Well,
you don't have to.
It brings a lot of things up. I mean, so how do you know if you're just doing stuff as files, then how do you know dependencies? How do you know the order things need to go? And you need to be able to script the database. I've had that happen so many times where, you know, you don't actually have something that's even deployable. You just have all these scripts, and because the order, the precedence, the dependencies, and then I mean, how many times have you tried to do a build and there's dead code? There's stuff that you may have it's there, it's scripted, but I mean, that stored procedure or that view, the table one of the tables or one of the objects it depends upon isn't in the database anymore, or those columns aren't there anymore. So if you really want to be able to get to where you're versioning something and then you can deploy it, and then you can build an upgrade script that's going to take you from one version to the next version, you have to be able to script and deploy. So that's just going to be a painful exercise to sort of get yourself to a different level of maturity. There's no like snap your fingers and make that happen.
Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, I'll say Redgate sees this all the time. We sell you, we show you a tool, show you how it works. We sell you the tool, and people are like very excited. We help you start to implement the tool, and we find out that your database, and I'm going to be as nice as I can, is a pile of dung. And just trying to be nice. And you can't compile from it because of so much dead code, missing columns, missing tables, and store procedures that haven't been called in 10 years but are still in there. I mean, anyway, yeah, that's the situation it sounds like he's in. All right, we got to move on. Because there's so many questions. This is great. Brian Lisser and Rob Sewell both asked roughly the same question. Rob says, how do you monitor your deployment success? And how do you measure that? Brian said, how can you use DB DevOps to determine your telemetry? Basically, how do you determine what you've deployed is actually benefiting your customer and not making things worse? Stuart, I don't think you've talked in a minute. We'll start with you.
Wow. And so you give me the tough one. I think that it always comes back down to that you need to have some sort of standard metrics into it. We're using a tool called App Dynamics right now. It's a great ALM. It's an expensive piece, so we're lucky that Jack Henry's investing in it corporate wide. But App Dynamics, one of the things it lets us do is begin to do statistical analysis to see if performance has improved or gotten worse, or where the bottlenecks are. And so there's some deep dive tools. So really, when you start talking about telemetry like that, it's the same classical problem that you're always dealing with. You got to define your KPIs in advance. What are you going to be looking for to say as a measure of success or failure? And then you've got to find some tool that's going to do your monitoring for you. And for people that are classical database administrators, we're going to look at things like CPU, memory utilization, disk utilization, all those traditional metrics that we've always used. But it all has to come back down to the business experience as to whether or not your customer is getting value post-deployment versus something else. So it helps if your deployment team is also the same team that is involved with the monitoring. In some enterprises, that's not always the cases. So not only do you have to now have conversations between your development team and your deployment team, but you now got to have conversations with your deployment team and your monitoring team to make sure that they understand that this is the point in time in which something changed. And I am, we talk a lot in our organization about change control so that we can identify when changes happen with the organization. I'm a big advocate for making sure that your change control process is part of your DevOps pipeline, so that all of the work that is being done in a release gets tracked all the way through automatically as you do your builds into your deployment, so that when you do something like a release in Octopus, it's these elements out of your dev pipeline that changed. This is when it happened. You can audit it, and then you can also go back and use it as a monitoring metric. So I don't have a concrete answer, but at a high level, it is define your KPIs up front and make sure you know when the change occurred, and then make sure that your business is finding some tool that lets them measure it. So.
Oops, sorry, I was muted. No, that was a good one. We're just gonna keep going if anyone wants to interject at any point, do. But otherwise, I'm just going to keep going because we've got so many questions. This is awesome. Kathy,
Okay.
Tom Friedman asked, how do you prevent the release approval process or approvers themselves from becoming a bottleneck? What if the approver is sick or on vacation?
Well, I would assume that you'd have some backup chain. In other words, if one person is not available, there's somebody else that automatically fills in for them. I'm not sure what else you would do, because you can't just let things go without, if you need that approval process, you can't just say, oh, they're not here, just let it go. That would be horrible. So hopefully you have someone who automatically fills in for that person, so that, and someone knowledgeable that can step in.
Okay. Anybody want to add anything to that one? Because I'm
I
just going to keep
do.
going.
I
Go.
think it's so important and often overlooked by a lot of companies that cross training is your most valuable tool. Absolutely, you cannot have just one developer who knows everything and does everything. You cannot have just one SRE person who is the only one who knows how to build Octopus packages and deploy them. And you can't have just one DBA who knows how to restore. Like you have to cross train, and it is so important. And if your company is not actively cross training right now, you need to have a conversation with management. You need to have a conversation with your team, because that's highly, highly important.
Hey guys, you're not muted. Falcon Events, we can hear you. Yeah. Oh well. We'll keep going. I think we can talk over them a little bit. Or can I mute them myself? Nope, I can't. Oh well. That's funny. Okay, so I'm not going to pick on anybody because this question is very hard. So anyone who wants to volunteer, can you talk about the database DevOps story outside of CI/CD? For example, any great examples of infrastructure as code for deploying servers, SQL installations, or lessons learned from trying to put your whole platform as code into action? This evil question was from Steve Clement. Who
I
wants
don't
it?
like you, Steve.
He's joking, Steve. We're not.
I think for us at Jack Henry, we're a conservative financial industry, so we still have a lot of segmentation. So our infrastructure is actually controlled by another team. So I don't have any great experience with that. I will tell you that we have been experimenting with that in our QA environment, particularly using Azure and the Azure scripting language to spin up and install all the components. It is not easy, but it is possible. What I would, based on the experiences that we've had, I would recommend that you don't try to run before you can walk. So it's baby steps, right? So first get the automation of the spinning up the environment and getting all the components installed on it first, and make that completely separate effort from any of your other CI/CD work that you're doing. In other words, don't try to spin up a whole new build environment on demand, because it's from what I've seen, you can make it go really fast, but you have to dump a lot of money and resources into making the server spin up on demand as quickly as you want. It's much easier to go to work with that kind of a scripting and infrastructure model, particularly for testing instances, to be that shared model. In other words, this is going to be your QA zone. So you can have them run a script to do it, and then they can deploy all of their packages into that new environment as a separate instance, and then redeploy and use that environment over and over again. If you're talking about like a more in production where you're trying to spin up services on demand, et cetera, that's not something we've encountered a need for inside of our organization. So I can't really tell you about it, but like I said, from what we've seen, it is possible to make it go faster, but that's a big investment. And it's something that if I were going to do it, I'd have to find the right reasons to justify it from a business perspective, to say, this is where we're going to spend our time. And then I want to make sure that I isolate it and limit it to the smallest possible area so that I can control the costs associated with it. So.
Anybody want to add to that one? That one's big. The one thing I would say is we've been working around that kind of stuff at Redgate, and SQL Clone is your friend, and buddy, because it lets you actually have databases with data that you can spin up really fast. And because when you get into the whole scripting and environment, Stuart already hit on it, speed's the key. It's easy enough to create a script that creates everything. But when it takes 4 days to run, it's a problem.
Right.
So you have to make it so that you can run it, in 4 minutes or at least, not 4 hours anyway. Anybody else want to? Sorry, I'm not supposed to interject. I'm just supposed to be helping. All right. So next up. Oh, wait. I messed up. There it is. I don't want to pick on anybody on this one either. How do you recommend handling feature packs or feature flags via DevOps? And that's from Nikhil Bhagwat. Stuart, you can't talk this time.
I'm trying not to. Thank you.
Anybody?
Yeah,
Mindy.
that's a can of worms right there. So you've got let's say you have an app, and I'm assuming this is the question, and the app has a database component, and then the customer can purchase a feature pack that's going to add some additional functionality to the app. So now you have the possibility of having your database version whatever plus feature pack whatever, which is actually a permutation of the database, right? And then how many feature packs do you let them add to this thing, which basically creates a and if you think about it, it's like I have a house that comes standard. It's the track home, but I let people add on to the side of it 2 extra bedrooms or something, right? So it's so how many square feet is your house, and is that really the same house? I think that you can do that, but then what happens is, and this is what happened where I used to work, is that we had basically, we didn't call them feature packs, but we had sort of this base database, and then we had upwards of 50 different additional things they could purchase that went along with the database. So, and they could buy one of the 50, or they could buy all 50, or they could buy 1, 7, 9, and 10. And so in order to QA, it became a Cartesian product of nightmare, right? Because how can you, and then you really need to say, okay, if you are on database version 5 and you have feature pack 1, 7, 9, and 10, those have to go with version 5. You can't leave those feature packs and upgrade the database and leave the feature packs behind. So you really, if you're going to be doing that kind of stuff, it's not to say that you can't do it, but you have to define what the rules are, and you're going to have to be able to tell your customers no sometimes. And if you don't tell them no sometimes, then you're creating a Cartesian product that is unQAable. I'm telling you from experience, it can become, your salesmen are going to want to do this because they want to tell the customer yes, 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 yes. But if you don't learn how to say, either put some rules around it, and then the second part of your question was the feature switches. So let's say your app ships and it's database version 5, but you have a configuration table in your database and it has 100 different settings they can turn on and off. Well, then you have to script the QA for that out. You have to be able to script out all the QA for that, because can they turn one on and other 99 not on, and there's your Cartesian product situation yet again, right? So it comes back down to rules, and what are you going to QA, and how many unique variations of stuff are you going to allow, or that you're going to QA? Very good question, and very, very hard to keep control of that.
Very true. Anybody want to add on that one? Otherwise, I've got a whole bunch more. These are great questions, by the way. Okay, so Shane O'Neill says, when do you get to the point that you're comfortable with a non-DBA pushing to production? I'm just going to answer that one myself. You don't. You never get comfortable, but that doesn't mean you don't do it.
Right.
Well, do you do it and don't you have that final approval? So they're really not directly pushing to production. You've got to have that final approval there by someone knowledgeable to make sure that the code's not going to break. And obviously you have tests along the way. So I don't think you got to get comfortable with it. I don't think it really happens.
I don't think the DBA. I think the problem is that we still think of DBAs being that last line of defense in production, and in reality, they need to be the first step in the process, right? So if your DBAs are not members of your development team and they're not the ones that are doing the actual development, then that's a problem, right? Because you'll never get that trust factor. And so when it talks about asking a non-DBA pushing into production, why are your DBAs not the ones using your development tools to push changes into production along the way? So it's really, again, it's that whole idea of shifting left. Everybody that is part of the development pipeline should be using the same development tools to get something into production. And so you want to have the people that are knowledgeable about data and knowledgeable about how it's going to perform right there in the beginning with you. The deployment release of software should be as automatic as possible, really, because the more automatic you can make it, the less headaches you have associated with just the release, and you can focus all of your energy on the development and the testing and making sure it's going to do what you think it should do well before you push that button, right? It's the button's not magic. It's that you put a lot of science into making the button do what you think it's going to do. You're just investing your time and energy up front rather than at the end of the day when you're trying to protect everything.
Right. Okay, I've got another one. Unless somebody wants to add to that one. I don't want to step on you guys at all. Okay, so I got another one. This one's a good one. This is from somebody who's just exploring the idea about DevOps or just learning. So Chris Binning says he's working in data warehousing, BI analytics. How do you deal with his phrasing is a little odd, so I'm just going to say, how do you deal with dealing with the testing of the changes that you're making when your database is 25 terabytes, which, it's like, yay.
SQL clone. I mean, and that's a polite answer for it, but in reality, I mean, it's the testing is the same that you do always. You either have to figure out a way to get a subset of your database over that represents the risky associated into a smaller environment, or you use a tool like SQL clone, which allows you to radically reduce that footprint into an area that you think about. So,
Kathy, in a nutshell, can you tell us what SQL clone is and what it does?
So SQL clone allows you to make copies of the database. You can have multiple. Let's say you have 10 developers. You could give each developer a copy of that database, but the footprint is only going to be a few megabytes. That's because we're using virtualization technology that kind of points to an image of that database. So it's all that data is not sitting there, but you can still treat it like a regular database. You can make new tables, you can change data, whatever you need to do. So it's a lot more fun to demonstrate it than to just describe it, Grant. It's really fun to demo, but basically it's a way that you can give as many copies as you need wherever you need them, and you've got the data. And obviously you can mask that data to hide sensitive information, so that doesn't go where it shouldn't go. And we make that pretty easy to do. But we just let you make as many copies of the data as you want, and you aren't creating those 25 terabyte copies. Each copy is just a little tiny database that just looks big.
Right. Okay, I got another one, and this one we're going to open up and get more input on, because I like this one. Deepika Oh, I'm gonna butcher your name. And I apologize in advance. Bandanatum, I think. And I do apologize. Has asked, and I love her question, that's why I'm bringing it up. Any preferred ways of database deployment? DACPack versus scripts, or something else. Preferred tools of deployment: DevOps, Azure DevOps, Octopus Deploy, AWS code, developer tools, Jenkins, TeamCity. What do we have preferences on DACPack versus scripts or on one of these tools?
I do.
Go.
See, I love Octopus Deploy. Love it. It is such an amazingly powerful tool. You can do so much with it. And one thing that I love the most is that it has a Redgate plugin. So I still have my SCA. It is you create a package, you get your NuGet package from development, and then you create your Octopus Deploy package just by going boop, 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 just literally just typing in some information. Then you put the Redgate SCA plugin in, and then you can either go forward with after you review the changes from SCA, you review the changes and say no or go, no go. It is that simple. You push a button and it's deployed, or it's not deployed and it's sent back to your development team with necessary changes. And the coolest thing is when we get the Redgate SCA, it not only shows us what was added, modified, and deleted in a very easy to read page, but it also gives us warnings of code that might be problem, of SQL code that might be problem. Like you have an asterisk somewhere where you shouldn't have an asterisk, or where it may cause an issue. And I just cannot say enough about how easy it is to learn Octopus Deploy, how much power it gives me to say go, no go on a deployment, and just how easy it is to set up, push a button, and you're done. I even send a message to my team's channels so that we have greater visibility. So a message goes to the team's channel that I set up that everyone in the company has access to, and they can go see the very last version of whatever that was deployed. Love it.
Cool. Mindy,
2 thumbs up.
do you have one that you want to talk about?
I've always had to do it with scripting just because of the environment that I was working in and how messed up it was. So, I mean, I've never, and I'll just admit, I have not had the opportunity to work in an environment where we didn't have gigantic challenges that created roadblocks for us. So we had to always do it with scripts. I mean, I was never even able to get to the point where I could, because the customers had copies of the databases, I had to do it with scripting, so that I could go in and mitigate what was not working correctly, because nothing was ever predictable. So I'm probably not a poster child of the way that it should be done. I'm a poster child of how you cope when you've had 25 or 20 years of rogue development, and then you're coming into an environment where there's already so much history. And so how do you work with that? And a lot of times the true automation doesn't, it's like something that's up on the shelf that you look at longingly and wish you could get there, but the scripting is the only way that I was really able to survive. So I'm not going to have like the how it should be done. I have more of like real world painful scars, and
Oh, and then and that's exactly why you're here. I mean, we want that kind of input. That's thank you. Kathy, do you want to add to this one?
Yeah, I really like Azure DevOps, and I think part of the reason I like it is because that's the main place I've spent, the main time I've spent. I haven't touched Octopus Deploy, touched Jenkins a little bit, but I think one thing that Microsoft has done a pretty good job of is the learning experience. You know, they have tutorials, they have classes, they have you know, lots and lots of documentation, and they give you multiple ways to do things. Do you want to work with a GUI? Do you want to work just strictly with scripting? So I really like it, and I just plan on you know, learning a lot more about it and getting things to work. It can be frustrating, just like everything in DevOps, to get it configured, and but once you do, it's just really satisfying and just beautiful to watch, I think.
So I will say that, and it kind of blends those answers together, is that, you know, we've had similar experiences to what Mindy is talking about. And where we have overcome that challenge a little bit is that we have focused our efforts on one database at a time. And once we pick a method to say that we're going to start taking NuGet packages and pushing them in using SCA via Octopus Deploy, right? And we say, for this database, all these other databases you want to send the scripts for, that's fine, but thou shalt not send us another script for this database, because it is now protected under source control and is part of our pipeline. And so we started and focused on those specific areas. And the tooling matters less as it is adhering to that process, right? Because where you run into troubles is when you start mixing. Like if you do a DAC deploy one time and script deploy the next time, you've immediately broken your process. And at that point, it becomes very easy for stuff to get lost and overwritten, and your source control stays a mess. So get protective about one small piece at a time, and just say, I'm going to do this one, and then you move on to the next one, and then you move on to the next one. But it's really, once you adopt a methodology, don't change, right? Stay with that methodology and evolve, but don't go back and forth, and don't try to blend the approaches. That's probably the biggest life lesson we learned early on. So
Right. I mean, I'll add to what everybody else has said. I've used pretty extensively all of the various tools at one point or another, and I prefer two things. One, scripting over DACPack. Mindy, you're so right. No arguments. It's just an exercise in control. And then in terms of the flow control tools, my favorite is still Azure DevOps. It really is. But I've been using the AWS stuff a lot lately, and there's some serious strengths there, especially if you're looking at multi-platform. It's different from Azure DevOps, and so I'm spending a lot of times, you know, concepts are the same, but then the implementation details are radically different. So I'm having to relearn stuff, which is bad. But yeah, if I had to pick one, you know, I mean, gun held to my head, Azure DevOps. I love it. So anyway, sorry, I know, again, I'm not supposed to be talking. Let's see. Where was that question? I've lost it. Oh, there it is. All right. So Steve Clement, who asked a really hard question, has now asked an easier question. Thank you, Steve. State-based or migrations approach, and why? Go.
Migrations, always migrations. State-based state-based is fine. I think if your database doesn't change much or is small enough that you can handle doing backups and restores without worrying about losing. If you can back up your database in 15 minutes and restore it in 15 minutes, then I think a state-based approach where you're only changing the schema and you're not having to worry about data moving around or loss of too much data, I think it's fine. But for me, the migration-based approach does so much to preserve not only just the model, but helps you preserve the data inside of it as well. Particularly because, you know, databases aren't just schema. It's schema and lookup tables and values that you have to add for configuration. So there's always going to be some configuration information that you're going to want to retain from deployment to deployment to deployment. So I'm leaning toward the migration model as well. And I know that you guys offer both tools. And I think for DBAs to be comfortable with source control, SQL source control was my first foray into actually getting SQL schema into source control. And I loved it. And it took a while for me to get swung around to the whole concept of SQL change automation, because SQL change automation is daunting to go from that model of, I'm preserving more than just the state of my database, the schema of my database, but I'm actually rolling step by step through the process. But once you learn that and grasp that, it's such a powerful approach. Because again, it lets you maintain from version to version and mitigate a lot of the risk associated with data loss. So.
Anybody else have different opinions? By the way, Redgate makes, we have a mechanism now in place. If you get Redgate deploy, you can actually do a hybrid. So you can do state-based in development and then use an additional mechanism to generate migrations for the release between environments, which it's a little new. Let's put it that way. But it's migration. It is a true hybrid model, which is the best of both worlds, which, we're down to, the 200 grit sandpaper at this point, but it still does need a little bit more sanding. But it works. It's functional. Yay. Which is awesome. Let's see. Okay. This is about drift. Andy Levy says, by the way, hi, Andy. My friend has a database that in theory is in source control, but in practice, there's been a lot of drift between the production schema and what's in source control. Is there recommendations for a not too painful way to resolve these differences before moving into a well-defined deployment pipeline? I saw your eyes light up, Mindy.
I'll mute myself. So I have a lot of experience with this, actually, because almost all of our customers would experience their own personal drift, right? And so this is where it's so good if you actually say, okay, I know what the production version of my database is supposed to look like. It is defined. I have basically a template or a version, or here is my schema. I'm not talking about the data in it necessarily, but this is and let's just focus on schema and DDL, right? And index structures and triggers and the things that are physical about a set database. And you say, this is the de facto version 5. And then this is where I love Redgate's tools, because I have time and time, they say, well, we don't know where things might have changed. And so we could go into test with the customer, apply the upgrade, and take them to where they were supposed to be on version 5. This should be version 5 now, because I've given you the upgrade script. And so now let's use the Redgate compare tool, the schema compare tool, and let's get a report and let's see what's different. And then we just go through it. And now, thankfully, the Redgate tool also script for you, like how do you make that look like this, right? But that's the painful part, where you kind of need to, hopefully it's not like a very long verbose, you have a succinct, nice report, and you're like, okay, there's these 5 indexes. I'm not so worried about those. Yeah. Wait, they've changed this table, or they've added stuff to this trigger, or wait, this other trigger's missing. So then you just have to go through it and figure it out. And that's where I don't know of any other way to do it other than to get knowledgeable people that know the app. Then you get a comb out and you detangle, and you discuss, and you look at, what are the, is this something serious? Is this not something serious? Is this code that, is this dead code that I don't even care about that I'm seeing here that's showing up? Or is this in some part of the app that's like, you know, this is part of our main circulatory system. It's attached to the side of their heart, for God's sake. Like, this is important. You know, so you just have to go through it. But that's where I love, first thing is you have to be able to version your database and have a copy of it, and then upgrade them to where they should be on that version, and then use the Redgate compare tool, and then see what it coughs up and work it.
Cool. All right, so we've got 5 minutes left. So basically what I'd want to do is go around with all four of you, I mean, the topic was database challenges. We've talked about a lot of them, and the questions have been fantastic. But I'm going to finish up with one other question, and the question's actually really simple. What have we missed in terms of challenges in the questions? You know, like what have we not asked? What have we not addressed? What have we not covered that you know causes pain in terms of automating database deployments? I will start with I'll pick on Kathy.
I'm still thinking.
Oh, okay. I'll start with Angela.
Well, I kind of want to shift a little bit away from the technical and talk about how important it is that you get everyone on board. Get everyone on board with just how important DevOps is. Get everyone on board with how important communication is, especially those very difficult conversations that you need to have between development and operations, between development members, between DevOps members, and between operations members. It's incredibly important to not gloss over that, and I believe that's a huge part of what DevOps really is. It's a huge part of what our job is. So it's not just all technical. The technical is the fun part, right? The rest of it is truly the difficult part.
Okay, that works for me. Stuart, you want to add something to that one?
I have trained Angela well as a Minotaur. I mean, that was she totally stole my answer. But, you know, apart from the cultural stuff, you know, I think if we do talk about what are the gaps in the technical things, I think that it's for database people, we've had, you know, our tool set is cool in certain ways that developers' tool sets are not cool. And some of the things that we've learned over the years of, like, you know, we make databases talk to each other and integrate well with each other and play well with each other. And the model is shifting, right? You know, when you start going into DevOps, the whole idea is that you really want to be focused on the applications of the database stack. So if you have databases that are kind of the hub of everything, that's a challenge, right? You know, if you have a lot of linked servers, a lot of cross database queries, your dependency stack becomes that Cartesian join that Mindy talked about in other cases. That you know, if you make one change in this data, it's going to have a cascading effect everywhere else, and so that's a little problematic to manage. And I don't have the only answer that I have for that is really what we've been doing is really encouraging our development team to focus more on treating databases like objects, in that they have well-defined endpoints and outpoints, and those all have to be part of your document and your application map, right? So that you can no longer it's real easy in SQL Server to write a query in one database that queries data out of another database, and you have to stop doing that, right? Because it just makes everything a painful thing to deploy, because again, not only now when you deploy this version of the database, you got to make sure it's compatible with this version of the database, plus all of the applications that talk to both of those databases. So that whole application mapping stack is something that we need to be aware of, and that's a challenge in database world. So it's not as good an answer as my culture one that Angela stole.
Tough, Mindy.
That totally gets into that. It's a segue, and is exactly what I was alluding to when I was like, oh, I know, because the application stack, you know, you may have your DevOps around the major part of your application, which is OLTP, which is bringing the data into your system. But how do you live gracefully with all of the SSIS packages? How do you live gracefully with EDI? How do you live gracefully with FTP things that are going out, and Power BI stuff that is consuming from it, and SSRS stuff, and all the other things that people may have written that is, they're all sort of, and I was trying to think of an analogy. I was like, okay, let's say the database is a refrigerator, and all sorts of different people, I mean, I'm putting stuff in that refrigerator, and suddenly I decide that not only are we going to have milk, we're going to have almond milk and milk, right? And then somebody else comes along and they don't know anything about the almond milk, and they're trying to bake a cake, and they just reach in there and get milk, and now I've screwed up their cake. I don't know. I was trying to think of an analogy, right? But it's sort of like I love analogies, and so yes, the database is an interesting thing because it is not truly isolatable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We have to, Kathy, do you have anything you want to add to this one? Because we actually are out of time, but I don't want to stop.
Yeah, I think you got to think about what regulations are affecting, all of these copies of databases that are going everywhere. Is there sensitive data? Are there credit card numbers? Is there personal information going to all these, QA environments? Any staging environments, dev environments? You've got to think about that, and you've got to make sure that sensitive data doesn't go to these environments, but yet still provide a good database with the right granularity of data, so that it behaves more closely as it would to production. So
right, yeah. No, that sounds perfect.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and say thank you for taking part in this. You guys were awesome. I can't believe you put up with me, but I'm really grateful that you do. And thanks so much for doing this. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of Past Summit. We got another day and a half to go. All kinds of great stuff coming your way. Swing by the Redgate booth and talk to us some more. We've got all kinds of details coming up. And other than that, bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.